An interesting discussion from several videos I've done about working women, their opinions, who should date who, sparked a bunch of controversy, and all of these woke feminists on Twitter are mad at me and whatever. But we're not going to be talking about relationships. We're going to move on from that and segue into a more interesting subject and how I think it relates to what happened with this controversy. Very quickly, for those that aren't familiar, I made a video talking about this article where women who are in their 30s and have careers only seem to find guys to date who don't make money and have no ambition. And the general argument I made is that a man who is both physically, personality-wise, and economically attractive, meaning they make money, they look good, they're charismatic, are likely going to choose younger women. That's the data we've seen published by OkCupid. It was written about by Jezebel. But so the backlash was interesting. I really don't care. I actually find it quite hilarious. I've laughed quite a bit, so it's enjoyable. But a bunch of these woke feminists on Twitter were really, really angry. And it made me start to think about, why is that? Why is it that this particular opinion was so offensive to them? And I think it has to do with a couple of things I've covered. So in one of the videos, I talked about how the other day I did this video. I showed a survey. When individuals were asked, what do you think society views as successful? The number one answer was fame. That makes sense. But when they asked the individual, what do you think would make you successful? They said, having kids. And that's a really, really interesting finding. But they also found that women were 20% more likely to view being famous and having a large social media following as signs of success in society. And so that made me wonder, is there some kind of correlation between gender and politics in this particular area? Well, the answer is obviously yes. We've seen a ton of different things. But I have this, this is a study report from Bo Weingart and Corey J. Clark, and there's some interesting findings having to do with the current political landscape. Notably, women are more likely to support censorship, and women are overwhelmingly more likely to be Democrat, at least millennial women. So I think that actually correlates perfectly with what I ended up finding, my experience, right? I put out this video where I said, as a guy who's got a successful career, several successful companies, and is expanding rapidly with staff, like we're doing really, really well, right? I would consider that to be economic success. And that was a direct reference to the article saying, why can't these women find men who aren't broke? I think the reason there was such a big backlash from these 30-year-old career women on Twitter is because the likelihood of a woman to be on Twitter, right? We have to realize Twitter, for one, it's 80 some odd percent, like 85 or so percent of the country doesn't use Twitter. So the only people who are going to be on it are people who likely think there is value in having a large social media following and being famous, having your opinion heard, right? Twitter is a wonderful place for narcissists and egotists who think that their opinion deserves to be heard. It's actually a really interesting phenomenon. The reason why so many famous people are narcissists is because you take one person who's more humble about their opinion, and another person who thinks they have the best opinion in the world, and that person who thinks they have the best opinion wants to make sure everybody hears it. So naturally, they go on Twitter. You'll end up with a bunch of woke feminists who think they're right, everyone else is dumb, and they ended up attacking me and my appearance and things like that. I really don't care. Things are going really, really well. We're expanding. We're looking at setting up a new office and properties and stuff. So, you feel free to say whatever you want. But we find something interesting. So I kind of want to talk about that. Why that backlash, and what do we see? So the first thing I'll just show you very quickly. This is a story from Vox a year and a half ago, or so. Republicans have a millennial woman problem. Nearly 70% of young women say they are leaning toward Democratic candidates in the midterms. And I think this makes sense when you think about policies. According to allsides.com, free speech is a right-wing issue. Now think about this. All Sides is trying to quantify what makes something left and what makes something right. And they tend to find that conservatives and the right will support free speech and the left is much less likely to. We then see that women are much more supportive of censorship. This is from Corey Clark's research. And then I think you'll likely see that there is a huge divide between men and women as it pertains to the issue of speech and fame and other issues. So we'll now segue away from the dating stuff and get into the political issue. Democrats likely embrace censorship because it's either because of or in response to the fact that there are so many women aligned with the party who also agree with censorship. This is either one of two things may happen. The Democratic Party begins to endorse censorship because there are more women entering, or more women are entering because they endorse censorship. I can't tell you which one precipitates the other, but there's a correlation there. So here's what I want to do. Let me read this. This is The Ideology of Censorship. Bo Weingard, Corey J. Clark, as I mentioned. They write, recent work has suggested that liberals have sacred values about protecting low status groups, and thus are particularly prone to bias against any information that portrays those groups unfavorably. In a pre-registered study, we tested whether liberals would support more censorship of information that portrays low status groups unfavorably than similar information that portrays high status groups unfavorably. The results very clearly supported predictions. Liberals consistently displayed double standards in their censorship preferences, such that they desired to censor information that portrays low status groups unfavorably more than information that portrays high status groups unfavorably. Moderates and conservatives supported more similar levels of censorship regardless of whether the information was favorable toward relatively high or low status groups. But conservatives did display a small preference for censoring Christian violence over Islamic violence. Exploratory analysis also revealed that millennials might be slightly more in support of censorship than Generation X in general, but baby boomer censorship support generally fell between that of Gen X and millennials. Now, I don't know if Corey and Bo have gone into the wider context and analysis, but I think I can shed some light on some of these things here and expand upon this. So in a conversation, someone asked about women and censorship. Corey tweeted, across multiple topics and conditions, women were consistently more supportive of censorship than men. The one exception was for text that argued that women evolved to be better leaders than men. For this passage, women were equally as non-supportive of censorship of men. So to clarify, someone asks, she says, women are against censorship of text that argues that women make better leaders than men. So basically, let me just pull up the next tweet here so I can show you. In a conversation that this was brought up, Corey said, just checked for interactions, and actually, women are more supportive of censorship for every topic and every condition except for the, quote, women evolve to be better leaders than men condition for the leadership topic. Thanks for these analyses. Suggestion, very interesting. Basically, when it comes to moderates and conservatives, they're pretty even-handed on what should or shouldn't be censored. Liberals tend to be much more in support of censorship and hold a double standard. That's what her study found. But she also found the same phenomenon for men and women. That the only thing women didn't want censored was the argument that they evolved to be better leaders than men. Once again, we see there is essentially a double standard. When the information was very favorable, they enjoyed this. But interestingly, every condition, so negative information, period, it would seem, triggered women more likely to be in support of censoring. Now, here's where it gets interesting then. If we're going to talk about liberals and conservatives, I think we need to start breaking down what these groups actually are. And according to Vox, they're actually looking at Pew data. 70% of young women say they are leaning toward Democratic candidates in the midterms. Slightly more, I believe, with women being around 51% of the population. That means among millennials, you have 70% of half of the population, and then you also have around half of the male population, giving a majority of individuals leaning Democrat. So when it comes to women in the Democratic Party, I'll just put it this way. It may be the reason we find people who identify as liberal being in support of censorship is because people who are liberal, are millennials at least, are more likely to be female. But I do think they did correct for that. So let me see. I don't know if she has she made a statement about it specifically. Okay, I don't know. She said, I quickly analyzed my support for censorship data by gender, and indeed, women consistently are more supportive of censorship than men. The questions, topics these data correspond to are described in the paper. So let me wrap all this up together, right? The point I'm trying to make. I'm not surprised that if I make a video saying, hey, if you're a woman in your early 30s and you have a career and you're only finding, you tend to find guys who are broke, this may be why, and my personal preference explains anecdotally why I feel that way. I say that and they naturally get offended. Look, if I said people who played golf are unfortunately going to be older and overweight for these reasons, I wouldn't be surprised if golfers got angry. But I think it's fair to point out that people who play golf are typically, shown on TV as being older and retirees. Not everybody, I get it. That's the point. But the issue is, you think about the sport itself. Are they going to play basketball? Of course not. When you're old, you're going to play a sport like golf where you get a lot of walking in. It's healthy, and it does take physical abilities, but there is a stark difference between competing in golf and competing in basketball, which is much more physically exhaustive and more intense, right? So if I were to point that out, I think the reason why we see so many people playing golf being old is because of these reasons. I wouldn't be surprised if younger golfers or even older golfers got angry that I said that. I get that. But I also think the issue is summed up in politics, the desire for censorship, and we start to see like an interesting insight in here. So yes, a lot of the outrage was Twitter. But of course, those who are on Twitter make up a small fraction of the country, and they tend to be journalists. The biggest faction of the biggest faction of individuals on Twitter are journalists. I believe around 25% of all like verified accounts are journalists. And so then you take early 30s women, they're journalists, they're personally offended by this, they don't care about the data suggests, so they personally attack me. But these are the same people who also are likely to believe in censorship, and yes, one of the women has advocated for the termination of my and other channels. So it's no surprise. So yes, I'm not going to mention who they are specifically because, fine, I try not to engage, but you can criticize me all you want. So this one particular individual has called for my and many others' termination from YouTube for like the betterment of society or whatever. Interesting. It all kind of comes together now. We look at the outrage over, my preference in dating and why men choose younger women or whatever, and we then see that women are more likely to support censorship and millennial women are more likely to be Democrats. It all comes together, doesn't it? I don't think there's any grand conclusion here other than it's interesting, and I'm not surprised that it's the woke feminists who are outraged about my personal preferences and opinions and are misconstruing it and attacking my appearance and all that stuff, fine. But I'm also not surprised they've called for my censorship. My opinion, my preference must be silenced. And that's what we tend to see. So I guess there you go. I think it's particularly fascinating that this was discovered. I wonder if there's a correlation between, in this study, gender and liberal or conservative. And, maybe I should reach out and ask. If they took only men by political position, would they find the same results, that liberal men are more in favor of censorship? I think you'd find the answer is yes, but not necessarily because liberals are for this, but because those who are for this are attracted to the position being held by the liberals, right? So if the Democrats are in favor of censorship, then there could be somebody who's politically uninitiated who hears about this and is attracted to the Democratic Party. That's my point. Other than that, to clarify and to wrap up, I'm not surprised the one of the women who was completely outraged by my statements about, wanting a wife to handle social aspects of my life. They're calling it trad wife, which is not what I said, and it's not even reflective of what my opinion was. But I'm not surprised it's the same person who's called for censorship. That's the point. It's left-leaning Democratic women and women in general. Interesting, right? So final point. The study found not only that liberals held double standards in terms of censorship, but that women were more likely to support censorship. Surprise, surprise. I don't know, get angry about it, whatever, I don't care, be mad, post things, make fun of me, fine. I'll see you guys in a few minutes, the next segment.